Hey, it's Dave from Cheapwinefinder.com, and today we're doing kind of a general information podcast, not a single wine. And it's basically, what does a wine label tell you? You know, on high-end wines, it's kind of more useful. But on a wine under $20, under $10, what information on that wine label does you any good that helps you buy a wine? And it's actually not good. I remember we've been doing the cheapwinefinder.com website for 11 years. And at one time I used to look at the label. Nowadays, it's almost an afterthought because there's nothing on there. There's nothing that you want to know. And I'm going to get into that. And here we go. We're going to talk about what's not there and maybe what should be there. Let's start with something simple, like the alcohol content. It has to be in every bottle. It's either on the back or in very small print on the edge of the front label. And say you got a wine that's 13.5% alcohol content. Well, by law, it has to be within 1.5%, which it could be actually 12% or it could be 15%. So even like the 13.5% doesn't actually have to be all that accurate. Is it probably close? Yeah. It's probably right, but it doesn't have to be right. I think the reason why they give them that leeway is because sometimes the labels are printed up before the final chemistry is in, and they should know roughly what the alcohol content is. That's not that tough to figure out. But when you look at it, you don't know if, they're accurate or are they just taking it easy and just putting, something in the middle. So even something as simple as the alcohol content can or cannot be accurate. Okay, so if you can't really completely trust the alcohol level on the bottle, then who made the wine? Like I said, with boutique wines, we're just a small producer in a single vineyard. That's pretty much cut and dried. But who made the wine? Like most modern wine companies, even family-owned ones, even these privately held ones, usually have 25 labels and a couple thousand acres of vineyards, and everyone's different. I'll try to come up with a scenario. So you got a family-owned or independently owned winery, and that is formed under one LLC, one corporation. And they have a vineyard. And for the insurance company goes, hey, you really should make that vineyard another corporation just because you don't want both things. If there's a problem with one, you don't want a problem with the other. So that's not a separate LLC. And they're doing well, and they decide that they want to buy another vineyard. But, rather than spend their own money, they get some investors, and they buy that other vineyard, and it is under a third LLC. And when they fitted out their winery, they made sure they had room for expansion. So they're probably using 60% of their winery right now. They're doing well, but they have 40% they don't use. And I read somewhere where 50% of all wineries in California are faux wineries, meaning that they don't own vineyards, they don't own their own winemaking facilities, they rent them. They have contracts with the vineyards, and they rent out excess space. So this company, because it's a good idea, they have excess space, let's make some money off it. So that's a corporation. And then they have, since they have all these different entities, they form another corporation just to put all the employees in there so they can lease the employees out to all these different entities. So you're not doubling up on jobs. And say you want to do a Trader Joe's wine. You ever notice Trader Joe's wines? If it's, it's a grizzly bear wine, Chardonnay, the back label will say Grizzly Bear Wine Company. Someone just made up that name. So they're going to have that corporation for those wines. So what the bottle is going to say, even though it's a family-owned winery and they're using their own facilities and the grapes are coming from their own vineyards, it's all a different web of separate companies. So when it look at the back label, all it's going to say is cellared and bottled by, which means pretty much nothing. I mean, cellared means you kept it around for a while before you sold it, and bottling, there's mobile bottling lines out there. You don't even have to have a winery to have a bottling line. So it doesn't tell you who, what, when, where, or anything. So you look at the back label and who made it? Well, even though it was made by an independent winery using their own stuff, it doesn't say that. And it doesn't have to be that. It could be some person, buying on the open market the lowest price grapes they can find and, just having it thrown together at some facility you don't know where. It's going to say the exact same thing. It's going to be the whole spectrum of what could happen. On the back of the label, it tells you nothing. That in itself doesn't help you at all. So you're looking at what, cellared and bottled by. There is so rarely that it says produced by or, that this is our wine. Even estate wines. I've seen estate wines where the winery had like 20 different vineyards and 3 different AVAs. Estate wine usually means from a small place, but it could be from all over California. So let's get into that by what the name brand on your label means, because sometimes that's even not what you think it is. Okay, so there's a label on the bottle. But who are they? Is it just a label? Is it a winery? Is it the same ownership today that it was 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? It's hard to tell. You can't really tell. Like one trend I've noticed lately, and there's been a couple of big examples of it, is that kind of hot brands that are selling very well, get sold off to major corporations. It's a good deal for both. The original winemaker makes a fortune, and the big wine corporations got a wine that's selling great. They don't have to build the label. But the name stays the same, but it's a completely different ownership. Is it the same wine? Sometimes these wines they're not tied to a vineyard. So they had contracts with different vineyards. The original winemaker had friends here and there. And when the major corporation buys that wine label, well, they don't either get those grapes, those contract vineyards, or they have their own vineyards. And sometimes the contract keeps the original winemaker around for a couple of years, and sometimes it doesn't. So you never really know who your wine is. You'd be surprised how many wines or how many labels used to be independent wineries and aren't anymore, or were purchased by this major corporation and now they're not. They got sold off by that major corporation. Constellation Brands is one of the big U.S. companies, sold their value price wines off to E&J Gallo, and E&J Gallo is very, very good with value priced wines. But are those labels going to be the same? I mean, Gallo's got their own vineyards. Did they get the vineyards? They get just the brand names. They get the winemakers. They get the facilities. What did they get? It's going to change. And do you know that from the label? No, you don't know that from the label. And there's all sorts of situations. I'm trying to look up wines, and I find out that sometimes it's okay. Sometimes I find out, this used to be for 50 years independent winery, and they got bought out. But hey, the vineyards are the same, and the same family is still making the wine. They're an independent part of this major company. And sometimes all that's left is the brand name. I mean, there's nothing left. Menage a Trois wines, which used to be 3 different grapes put together. I think they got spun off. I'm not sure. I didn't look that up before I started talking. But the last time I looked, there was like 5. So it was like, I'm not sure what you want to call that one. But it's not a Menage a Trois. And so the name brand, who is it? Is it a corporation? Is it a family-owned winery? Is it the same people owned it, last year? Is it the same vineyards? Is it the same winemaker? Is it the same anything? Well, the label won't tell you that. And half the time, if you go online and look it up, it won't tell you that. I mean, you're going to have to actually Google direct question, who owns this wine, or else you're not going to know. And, normally if you do that, you'll get some trade publication. It'll tell you who owns it. And, not all the time that makes a big difference, because wine nowadays is pretty much good across the board. I can't think of any winemaker big wine company who makes bad wine. But you don't know. The label doesn't tell you what you think it does. So does the label tell you where the grapes come from? Again, if it's a expensive wine, it'll tell you probably what vineyard it came from. But in the cheapwinefinder.com kind of wines, California on the label is a pretty big area. When it says California, that means that basically speaking, two of the three major areas, or maybe all three of the major areas, Central Coast, the North Coast, and the Central Valley, vineyards from each of those sections were at least two of the sections, or all three of the sections are in that put California on the label. And even something like Sonoma, that's a huge area. Or Monterey. Monterey has pretty much every conceivable growing condition imaginable. It's got cool weather on the coast. It's got mountains. It's got valleys. It's got warmer areas that are blocked by mountains and doesn't get the cool air. It's got places that have gaps in the mountain that gives it cool air and and moisture, and then it has different soils. And Monterey doesn't tell you much, and that's an AVA inside the Central Coast. And then there's wines that sometimes in the cheap wine finder, in the value priced wines, the grapes came from the exact same vineyard as a $25 bottle of wine, just that they made them differently, a more advanced and more complex production values on the $25 wine, and better oak treatments to it. And the $10, $8 wine was done kind of quick and easy, bright and fruity and fresh. But they came from the exact same place. And for marketing reasons, even though the $25 wine says Dry Creek in this exact same vineyard, exact same juice, on the $8 one, they'll put California down there, just so there's a differentiation, because if you see Dry Creek on an $8 one and on the $25 one, you're going to get confused. So the location's not there, or it's a huge area. And just saying like Russian River Valley AVA, there's a lot of space there. I just did some Sonoma Coast, and it's not at Sonoma Coast, is a kind of a small AVA. There's 4,000 or 5,000 acres there. So, even putting Sonoma Coast, it does narrow things down, but 4,000 or 5,000 acres is a large place. Your wine doesn't, if it says California, it could be anywhere. If it says Sonoma, it's huge. It says, Monterey, it could be anything. Even when it narrows down, it could be anything. So location doesn't tell you much. Why not? The grapes came from somewhere. Are they ashamed of them? I doubt that. I think they're pretty happy with their wines. Most people are. Even inexpensive wines, they're pretty proud that they made something that good for the value price. Why isn't that there? It's because the laws say it doesn't have to be there. It gives them this out by putting California on. Now, there's even U.S. wines. When you get, I've seen Oregon wines that have some Washington grapes in them too, or California. So it says United States. It's like, gee whiz. Just, you're telling me absolutely nothing. So even the location of the grapes, where the vineyards are, the label doesn't really tell you. There are circumstances when it does, but about 75% of the time it tells you virtually nothing. Okay, you're in a wine shop, grocery store, wherever, trying to buy a wine, looking at the label, and you want to make a decision on what wine to buy. And what do? The alcohol content could or could not be true. The label maybe it's the same people who made it last year. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it is independent winery. Maybe it isn't. Location of the grapes. Yeah, who knows? How do you decide what to buy? You can't trust anything. There's certain wines, maybe you've had them before and hopefully they haven't changed hands since you had them last. So what is on that label that gives you some clue to what you're buying? And here's the weird thing about it. It's the artwork. If it's a classic, like old school label, it's probably kind of a classic old school wine. If it's got, kind of edgy, it's probably a new wine, kind of new modern wine, maybe aimed at a younger audience, a little spicy, different cues, different colors will try to trigger different things. Marketeers nowadays know how to get to their audiences, and that label, especially in the cheap wine fair, in the value wine label, a lot of these wines are actually produced by huge corporations. So they have people on hand designing those labels that are really pinpointing it to their audience. Some of these boutique wineries that, family owned, well, their labels are probably done by, their daughter-in-law or something. But in the more mass-produced, drink it now, inexpensive ones, there's science going into those labels. So you can actually, if you're reading the labels correctly, and one thing most people have at this point, they've grown up with advertising, they know how to read the subliminal messages coming at you. That's about the only thing you can trust, because these people are pretty good at giving you the clues from the label. Nothing else on there is worth a damn. So that's the only thing you've got. Why? Well, because these are the laws that have been around for 50 years. They can do a scan thing where you can just scan it and it'll give you a list of where all the vineyards are and who the parent company is. And, it'd probably give you a rundown of how it was made if they felt like it, but no one does, because guess what? No one's looking at the label anymore. You're looking at the picture on it. So there you go. So when they go, you can't buy by the label, it's the only thing there. I mean, unless you've had the wine before and you know it and you trust it, you don't know a thing about that wine. Trust the label. So that's me, cheapwinefinder.com. That's what I do nowadays. The one that catches your eyes, maybe that's it. Yeah, I do. Every time I look at a wine, I look it up. I go online. I try to find out, some information on it, but I'm weird. You probably don't do that. So, there you go. Just go with what you know, which is what the label says to you. And that's it. So there we go. Adios. Keep it cheap. That's all I got. And labels are useless. What can you do? And I'll talk to you a little bit. Adios. Bye-bye.